I remember the moment I realized my own son saw me as nothing more than a paycheck. I remember it because that memory, unlike so many others that slip through my fingers like water, burned itself into whatever fragments of my mind are still mine. They told me I have Alzheimer's. They told me I would forget. They told me the people I love would become strangers. But what they never told me, what no one ever prepared me for, was the possibility that I would remember with perfect clarity the moment my child stopped seeing me as his mother and started seeing me as an opportunity. You know that feeling when you wake up and for just a second everything is normal, and then reality crashes down and you remember that your mind is betraying you, that the simplest things now require monumental effort, that the faces you should know best sometimes look at you with the eyes of strangers. That was my every morning. That was the weight I carried before I even opened my eyes, before I even remembered my own name, before the day had a chance to hurt me in new and creative ways. But this morning, this particular Tuesday that I will never forget no matter how much this disease tries to take from me, this morning was different because I had an appointment that might save my life, and I needed my son to drive me there. Let me tell you how I got to this point. Let me tell you about the months and years leading up to that terrible Tuesday, so you understand that this was not just one bad day, not just one moment of cruelty, but the culmination of a slow and devastating transformation that I watched happen to my own child and could do nothing to stop. The Alzheimer's diagnosis came first, 18 months before the cancer, and it came on a Wednesday afternoon in a doctor's office that smelled like antiseptic and fear and the faint chemical scent of hope evaporating. I was there because I had gotten lost driving home from the grocery store, a route I had taken 3 times a week for 20 years, the same turns, the same streets, the same familiar landmarks that should have been as natural to me as breathing. But that Tuesday, or was it Wednesday, I cannot remember now, I ended up 2 towns over crying in a parking lot with a cart full of melting ice cream and frozen vegetables turning to mush, and no idea how I had gotten there, or where there even was. A kind stranger, a woman maybe 30 years old with gentle eyes and a soft voice, found me sitting on the curb. She called the police. The police called Sarah. Sarah called Daniel. And Daniel had said, and I remember this so clearly even though I cannot remember what I ate for breakfast this morning, he had said in that dismissive tone I was starting to recognize, "Mom is getting old. This stuff happens. Don't worry about it." But Sarah did worry. Sarah took the next flight out and came to stay with me for a week, and she noticed things that I had been trying to hide from myself, trying to pretend were not happening, trying to explain away as just normal aging or stress or grief over losing Robert. She noticed that I asked the same questions over and over within the same conversation. "What time is Sarah arriving?" I would ask, and she would tell me, and 5 minutes later I would ask again. She noticed that I couldn't remember if I had taken my medication, even though I had pill organizers labeled with each day of the week. She noticed that I had burned 3 pots in 5 days because I put water on to boil for tea or pasta or something I cannot even remember anymore. And then I would wander into another room and forget completely that I had left the stove on. She noticed that I called her by the wrong name sometimes, called her Margaret, which was my sister's name. My sister who had been dead for 10 years, whose funeral I can still see in flashes, whose face I can sometimes remember and sometimes cannot. She noticed that I wore the same clothes 3 days in a row because I forgot I had already worn them. She noticed that my house, which I had always kept immaculate, which Robert used to joke was clean enough to perform surgery in, was now dusty and cluttered and full of half-finished projects I had started and abandoned when I forgot what I was trying to do. Sarah noticed all of these things, and she did not say anything at first. She just quietly helped. She did the laundry, she cleaned the kitchen, she organized my medications, she made lists. And then, on the 4th day of her visit, she sat me down at the kitchen table, the same table where Robert and I had shared 43 years of meals, the same table where I had fed my children when they were small, the same table that now felt too big for just me. And she said in a voice that was trying very hard not to cry, "Mom, I think we need to see a doctor. I think something is wrong." And I wanted to argue with her. I wanted to tell her I was fine, that she was overreacting, that everyone forgets things sometimes, but I couldn't, because I knew. Somewhere deep inside me, beneath all the denial and fear and desperate hope that this was temporary, I knew she was right. She made me an appointment for the next day. She sat in that doctor's office with me while he asked me questions I couldn't answer and gave me tests I couldn't pass. He asked me to remember 3 words and repeat them back to him 5 minutes later. Apple, table, penny. I tried so hard. I repeated them to myself over and over in my head. Apple, table, penny, apple, table, penny. But when he asked me 5 minutes later what the 3 words were, they were gone, completely gone, erased like they had never existed. I could see the concern in his eyes. I could see Sarah gripping the arms of her chair so hard her knuckles were white. And then came more tests, more questions, more failures. He asked me to draw a clock showing 3:15. I drew something that might have been a circle with numbers scattered randomly inside it, and 2 lines that were supposed to be hands but pointed to nothing in particular. He asked me what year it was. I said 2019, but it was 2023. He asked me who the president was. I said Obama, even though I knew that was wrong the second it left my mouth, but I could not retrieve the right answer. And finally, he said the words that would change everything. Early-stage Alzheimer's disease. Progressive, irreversible, degenerative. We can slow it down with medication, but we cannot stop it. We cannot reverse it. What you are experiencing now will get worse. You will forget more. You will need more help. You will lose more of yourself until eventually there is nothing left but a body and a heartbeat and eyes that no longer recognize the people you love most. I am so sorry. Those were his actual words. I am so sorry. Like he was apologizing for the weather or for running late. Like his sorry could somehow make up for the fact that he had just told me my brain was eating itself from the inside out, and there was nothing anyone could do to stop it. Sarah held my hand while I cried. She helped me to the car. She drove me home in silence because what was there to say? What words exist that can make that kind of news bearable? She made me tea that I didn't drink. She sat with me in the kitchen while the afternoon light faded through the windows and turned everything gold and then pink and then gray, and we both tried to process what this meant, what was coming, what I was going to lose, my independence, my driving, my ability to live alone, my memories of Robert, of my children's childhoods, of my own life. Everything that made me who I was would slowly dissolve until I became a stranger even to myself. That night, Sarah called Daniel to tell him. I listened to her half of the conversation from the living room where I was sitting in Robert's chair, the big leather recliner he used to sit in every evening to read the paper or watch the news or just close his eyes for a few minutes before dinner. The chair that still smelled like him if I pressed my face into the cushion, like his aftershave and his laundry detergent and something else that was just him, just Robert, a smell I was terrified I would forget. Sarah's voice started quiet and measured but got louder as the conversation went on. She was arguing with him. I could hear her saying, "Daniel, this is serious. This is not something you can just ignore. Mom needs help. She needs support. She needs family. She needs us." And then there was a long silence where Daniel must have been talking, must have been making excuses or explanations or whatever it is he told himself to justify his absence. And then Sarah said, in a voice so tight with anger I almost didn't recognize it, "Well, when you can find time in your busy schedule to care about your own mother, when you can spare a few hours from your incredibly important life to visit the woman who gave you life, you let me know." And she hung up. Daniel did not visit. Not that week while Sarah was there trying to set up support systems and routines. Not that month after Sarah had to fly back to her own family. Not for 6 months. He called occasionally, brief calls that felt perfunctory, obligatory, like he was checking a box on some list of things he was supposed to do. He would ask how I was doing in a tone that suggested he was not really listening to the answer, was already thinking about the next thing he had to do, the next place he had to be. The calls lasted 3 or 4 minutes before he had to go. Always had to go. Had to get back to work. Had to meet someone. Had to do something urgent that was always more important than his mother's disintegrating mind. Sarah tried to get him to come visit. She sent him articles about Alzheimer's, information about what to expect as the disease progressed, suggestions for how he could help, resources for family members. He never responded to a single message. It was like he had decided that my diagnosis was an inconvenience he could avoid if he just pretended hard enough that it wasn't happening. Sarah could not stay forever, even though I could see in her eyes that she wanted to. She had a husband, Michael, who was patient and understanding but who needed her at home. She had 2 children, Emma and Jack, who were 8 and 10 and who needed their mother. She had a job as a nurse that she had already taken too much time away from. She stayed for 3 weeks. 3 weeks during which she set up everything she possibly could to make my life manageable after she left. She made me the notebook, the blue spiral notebook that has become my external brain, where I was supposed to write everything down. Everything. She put labels on all my medications with clear instructions in big bold letters: take with breakfast, take at bedtime, do not skip. She programmed important numbers into my phone with pictures so I would know who I was calling. Sarah with her big smile, Daniel looking away from the camera, Mrs. Chen from next door making a funny face, Dr. Patterson's office showing just the clinic sign. She hired a cleaning service to come once a week. She arranged for grocery delivery. She put notes all over the house. Turn off stove. Lock door at night. Your name is Margaret Ann Richardson. Today is written on the calendar. She did everything she could possibly do, and it still was not enough because she could not be here, and I needed her here. The morning she left, I stood at the door and watched her pack her suitcase into the rental car, and I felt like I was watching my last tether to safety drive away. She hugged me so tight I could barely breathe, and she was crying and trying not to cry, and failing completely. "Call me every day," she said. "Every single day. Promise me." And I promised, even though I knew there would be days I would forget, days the phone would feel like an alien object in my hand, days when I would not remember I had a daughter or what a phone was for. But I promised anyway, because that is what she needed to hear. The first few months alone after Sarah left were harder than I can find words to describe. I would wake up every morning in the bed I used to share with Robert, and for those first few seconds before full consciousness arrived, I would be myself again, whole and sharp and certain. I would be Margaret Ann Richardson, wife of Robert Richardson deceased, mother of Sarah and Daniel, retired school teacher, 68 years old, living in the house on Maple Street that we bought 32 years ago. And then full consciousness would flood in like cold water, and with it the knowledge that I was sick, that I was forgetting, that I was losing myself piece by piece, like a photograph left too long in the sun, until the image fades and fades and fades, until nothing remains but a blank piece of paper. The grief of it was crushing. Every single morning, I had to remember that I had Alzheimer's. Every single morning, the diagnosis was new and terrible all over again. I developed routines because the doctors said routines were important. Routines would help. Routines would give structure to days that otherwise dissolved into fog and confusion. I would get up at 7 every morning. I would check my notebook to see what day it was. I would check the calendar Sarah had hung in the kitchen with big, clear numbers and notes about what was happening each day. Tuesday, trash day. Thursday, cleaning service comes. I would make coffee even though half the time I forgot to drink it, and found it cold on the counter hours later, the mug sitting there like an accusation, like proof of another small failure. I would take my medications following Sarah's labels exactly. I would make breakfast. Toast, usually, because toast was simple and hard to mess up, although I did burn it sometimes. Did forget it in the toaster, until the smoke alarm went off and frightened me so badly. I would stand in the kitchen crying and not knowing why I was crying, or what the horrible noise was, or how to make it stop. I started talking to myself, out loud, narrating my own life like I was a character in a story someone else was writing, and I was trying to make sense of the plot. I am in the kitchen now. I am making breakfast. I am putting bread in the toaster. I am waiting for the toast. The toast is done. I am putting butter on the toast. It helped somehow. It made me feel less alone in the terrible silence of the empty house. It gave me something to hold on to when the fog rolled in thick and gray, and I could not remember what I had been doing, or why I was standing in the middle of the living room holding a dish towel and crying. The neighbors probably thought I was crazy. Maybe I was. Maybe I am. It is hard to know the difference anymore between what is the disease and what is just me trying desperately to survive it. I fell once during those first months alone, and the fall felt like a metaphor for everything else that was happening to me. I was trying to change a light bulb in the hallway because the bulb had burned out, and the hallway was dark, and I kept forgetting it was dark and walking into walls. So I got a chair from the kitchen and I stood on it and I reached up to unscrew the old bulb. But I forgot I was standing on a chair. I forgot that I was elevated, that there was nothing but air behind me. I stepped backward to get a better angle and there was nothing there. and I fell. I hit the floor hard. I heard something crack. The pain in my wrist was so sharp and bright it cut through all the fog and confusion and brought everything into terrible crystal clarity. I lay there on the floor for I don't know how long, 20 minutes maybe, an hour. Time does not work right anymore. I lay there trying to remember what I was supposed to do, who I was supposed to call, whether I even had a phone and where it might be. Finally, I managed to pull myself up using the wall. My wrist was swelling and the pain was making me nauseous. I found the phone. My first instinct was to call Robert, but Robert has been dead for 4 years, even though sometimes I still cannot believe it, still expect to hear his key in the lock, still set a place for him at dinner before I remember. I called Sarah, but she did not answer. She was probably at work. She was always at work, or with her children, or living her life 5 states away. So I called Daniel, my son, my firstborn, the baby who used to curl up in my lap and fall asleep with his tiny hand wrapped around my finger. He picked up on the 6th ring and said, kind of annoyed, kind of rushed, kind of like I was interrupting something important. Yeah, Mom, what's up? I told him I fell. I told him I thought my wrist was broken. I told him I was scared and in pain and I needed help. There was a pause, a long pause. And then he said something that should have told me everything I needed to know about who he had become, but that I was too desperate, too hurt, too alone to hear. He said, okay, well, do you want me to call you an ambulance or something? Like it was a question, like he was asking me to make the decision about whether my injury warranted his concern, his time, his physical presence. Not, I will be right there, Mom. Not, hang on, I am coming. Not, let me help you. Just, do you want me to call you an ambulance or something? Or something. Like my broken wrist was a minor inconvenience he was trying to outsource. I took an ambulance to the hospital alone. I sat in the emergency room for 4 hours alone, surrounded by other people's families, other people's loved ones who sat with them and held their hands and advocated for them when the nurses did not come fast enough. They x-rayed my wrist and confirmed it was fractured in 2 places, and put me in a cast that was heavy and awkward, and made everything harder in a life that was already nothing but hard. They gave me prescriptions I did not fully understand for pain medication and antibiotics. They gave me discharge instructions I tried to write down in my notebook, but my left hand was clumsy, and the words came out crooked and barely legible. They sent me home in a taxi alone because there was no one to pick me up, no one waiting for me, no one who cared enough to show up. Daniel texted me later that night, 3 words, hope you are okay. Not, are you okay, which would have required him to wait for an answer, to engage in actual conversation, to demonstrate actual concern. Just hope you are okay, a statement, an assumption, a way to check the box that said he had acknowledged my injury without having to actually do anything about it. I did not respond. What was there to say? What words could possibly convey the depth of my disappointment, my hurt, my growing understanding that my son no longer saw me as his mother, but as an obligation he resented? Sarah called the next morning when she saw my missed call from the day before, when she found out what happened. When I told her about the fall and the broken wrist and Daniel's response, she was furious in a way I had rarely heard her. She called Daniel immediately, and I could hear her half of the conversation even though I was in the other room. You are a terrible son, she yelled. You are selfish and cruel, and I am ashamed to call you my brother. Mom could have died. Mom was alone and hurt and terrified, and you couldn't even be bothered to get in your car and drive 20 minutes to help her. What is wrong with you? What happened to you? I don't even recognize you anymore. I don't know what Daniel said back. Sarah would not tell me later when I asked. She just said, Mom, I am so sorry. I am so sorry you had to go through that alone. I should have been there. And I told her no. She had her own life, her own responsibilities. She could not be expected to drop everything every time I needed help. But the truth was, I wished she could. I wished she lived next door instead of 5 states away. I wished she could be the one I called when I was scared. But she had already done so much, sacrificed so much, rearranged her entire life to help me. I could not ask for more. But I was not entirely alone during those months, even though it often felt that way. I had my neighbor, Mrs. Chen, who was 78 years old and sharp as a knife and who checked on me every single afternoon like clockwork. She would knock on my door at 3 o'clock and bring me tea, always jasmine tea in a thermos that stayed hot, and she would sit with me for an hour and tell me stories about her grandchildren. She had 5 of them, and they were all brilliant and accomplished. and she was so proud. She told me the same stories over and over, but she never seemed to mind that I didn't remember hearing them before. She never got impatient when I asked the same questions repeatedly. She just answered them every single time, like it was the first time she was hearing them, like my repetition was not a burden, but just part of our routine, part of what it meant to be my friend during this terrible time. Mrs. Chen was kinder to me in those afternoons than my own son had been in months. She saw me as a person, not as a problem. There was also Father Michael from St. Anthony's, the Catholic church Robert and I used to attend every Sunday, back when I could still drive myself places, back when I could still sit through a service without getting confused about where I was, or why I was there, or who all these people were singing hymns around me. Father Michael started coming to visit me once a week after Sarah called him and explained my situation. He would bring communion in a little silver case. He would pray with me even though I was not sure I believed in God anymore after everything that had happened. How could a loving God give me this disease? How could a loving God take Robert, the love of my life, my partner, my best friend, and then 4 years later start taking my mind too? How could a loving God let me stand at the stove and forget I was cooking until the smoke alarm screamed? How could a loving God make me burden my daughter? How could a loving God turn my son into a stranger? But Father Michael never tried to answer those questions with platitudes or easy theology. He just sat with me in my doubt. He just held my hand and said, "God sees your pain. You are not forgotten. You are loved even when you cannot feel it, even when everything feels dark and hopeless and unbearably hard." And sometimes that was enough. Sometimes it was not, but I appreciated that he came, that he kept coming even when I forgot he had been there the week before. And then came the cancer. 6 months into living with Alzheimer's, 6 months into this new reality of forgotten names and lost moments, and a mind that felt like a house with all the lights going out 1 room at a time, 6 months into learning how to live with a disease that had no cure and no hope, I started feeling tired, more tired than usual, a deep bone weariness that sleep did not touch, that rest did not help, that seemed to live in my marrow. I started losing weight without trying. My clothes hung loose on my frame. My skirts needed a belt. My blouses gaped. I had no appetite. Food tasted like ash and cardboard and effort. I told myself it was depression. I told myself it was grief. I told myself it was just part of getting old, part of losing your mind, part of watching your life fall apart in slow motion. But Mrs. Chen noticed during one of her afternoon visits. Mrs. Chen, who saw me every single day, who knew what I looked like when I was okay, and what I looked like when I was not, she noticed the weight loss, and the exhaustion, and the way I moved like even existing hurt, and she said, "You need to see a doctor. Not next week, not when you feel up to it. Today. You need to go today." And because I trusted her more than I trusted my own failing judgment, I went. The cancer diagnosis came on a Thursday, which I only know because I wrote it in my notebook. Thursday. Cancer. Stage 3. Pancreatic. Bad. The doctor's mouth was moving and I was trying so hard to focus, to hold onto his words, to keep them from dissolving the moment he spoke them like everything else dissolved now. But I caught enough to know it was serious, enough to know it could kill me, enough to know that treatment needed to start immediately if I had any hope of survival. I had my notebook and I wrote down everything I could, my hand shaking so badly the words came out jagged and crooked. Chemotherapy, every week, starts next Tuesday, cannot miss appointments. Timing is critical, must have transportation, cannot drive yourself. I called Sarah from the parking lot of the medical building and I told her, and she immediately said she would get on a plane that night. She would come, she would take care of everything, but I told her no. I told her she had already done so much, uprooted her life for 3 weeks to set me up after the Alzheimer's diagnosis, called me every single day, sent money to help with my medical bills. I told her she had her own family who needed her. I told her I would be fine. I told her I could handle this. I lied. We both knew I was lying, but she had to let me try. She had to give me the dignity of believing I could manage my own life for a little bit longer, even though we both knew that window was closing fast. So I called Daniel that night, my son, my firstborn, the baby I had held in my arms 37 years ago, the toddler who used to climb into my lap when he was sad, the boy who used to make me breakfast in bed on Mother's Day with burned toast and watery orange juice and a card he had made himself, the teenager who used to tell me everything, every worry, every hope, every dream. I called that person even though I knew he did not exist anymore, knew he had been replaced by this stranger who spoke to me in clipped tones and always had somewhere else to be. He answered on the fifth ring. I could hear noise in the background, music, voices, the sound of a life being lived while I sat alone in my too quiet house trying to find the courage to say the words out loud. "Mom," he said, and there was that edge in his voice already, that impatience, that resentment of my intrusion into whatever he was doing. I told him about the cancer. I told him about the chemotherapy. I told him I needed help getting to my appointments every Tuesday for the next 6 months because my license was gone, because I could not drive anymore, because I could not be trusted behind the wheel. There was a pause, a long pause. I could hear the music in the background, someone laughing, and then he said something that punched the air out of my lungs. He said, "I can do that, Mom, for $200 per trip, each way, $400 total, cash." At first I thought I misheard him. The Alzheimer's does that sometimes, scrambles words, makes me hear things that weren't said, makes me doubt my own ears. But he repeated it, slower this time, making sure I understood. $200 each way, $400 total. He had expenses, he explained in that same casual tone like we were discussing the weather, gas, time away from work, wear and tear on his car, his convenience, his schedule disruption. He rattled off justifications like he had prepared them, like he had thought about this. Like charging his dying mother to take her to chemotherapy was a perfectly reasonable business transaction, and not a profound betrayal of everything a parent and child are supposed to mean to each other. If you are watching this and you understand what it feels like to need the people who are supposed to love you most, if you know the specific pain of being a burden to your own children, if you have ever felt invisible in a room full of family, if you have ever had to pay for basic human kindness from someone who once called you mama, then you know you are not alone in this. And right now in this moment, I am telling you that your experience matters, that your pain is real, that what you are going through deserves to be witnessed and acknowledged. And I want to ask you something, not for me, but for every person who will watch this video and feel seen for the first time in months or years. I want you to scroll down right now and leave a comment that says, "I see you and you are not a burden." Just that simple phrase, "I see you and you are not a burden." Copy it, paste it, leave it in the comments. Because when you do that, you are not just leaving words on a screen. You are telling someone who feels completely alone that they matter. You are reaching across the digital void to hold the hand of a stranger who is walking the same painful path you are walking. You are building something beautiful out of something broken. You are creating a community of people who understand that love should not have a price tag, that family should not be a transaction, that needing help does not make you worthless. So please right now, pause this video and leave that comment. "I see you and you are not a burden." Let those words be a light in someone's darkness today. Let them be the thing that makes another human being feel less alone, less ashamed, less convinced that they deserve to be abandoned. I should have said no to Daniel. I should have told him that mothers don't pay their children to care about them, that love isn't supposed to have a price tag, that I spent 37 years feeding him and clothing him and sitting up with him when he was sick with fever or nightmares or heartbreak, and I never once sent him an invoice. I should have told him that I changed his diapers and wiped his tears and sacrificed my career and my money and my time and my body to bring him into this world and raise him to be a good man, and I never asked for anything in return, except that he would love me when I needed him most. I should have told him all of that, but I didn't. I said okay, because I needed to get to that hospital, because I was scared of dying, because somewhere deep in my deteriorating mind, I still believed that maybe this was just his way of coping with my illnesses, that maybe he would get me there, and once we were together the money wouldn't matter, that maybe my son was still in there somewhere beneath this stranger who spoke to me in dollar signs. The first treatment was scheduled for a Thursday. I woke up that morning and for a moment I forgot why my stomach was churning with dread, and then I remembered cancer, chemotherapy, poison. I had laid out $400 in cash on the kitchen table the night before, crisp 20s that represented hours of my life, years of careful budgeting, the savings of a woman who grew up during leaner times and never forgot that money was hard-earned and precious. I stared at that money, and something inside me broke a little bit more. This is what I have become, I thought. This is what my life has been reduced to. Paying my own child to pretend to care. Paying for the basic human decency of a ride to medical treatment that might save my life. He arrived exactly on time. Daniel, my son, 37 years old, and looking more like his father every day, except Robert would never have done something like this. He was wearing sunglasses even though it was overcast and threatening rain. His phone was already in his hand before he even came through the door, his thumbs moving across the screen with practiced speed, his attention somewhere else entirely. Somewhere that was not his mother's kitchen, not his mother's fear, not his mother's cancer. "Morning, Mom," he said without looking up, without meeting my eyes, without acknowledging that this was a significant day, a scary day, the first day of a fight for my life. "You ready?" I picked up the money with hands that would not stop shaking. $400 in cash. I held it out to him, and for just a second I thought maybe he wouldn't take it. Maybe he would see how wrong this was. Maybe some part of the boy I raised would surface and he would say, "No, Mom, I was kidding. Of course I won't take your money. Of course I will help you. You are my mother and I love you." But he didn't. He took the money without hesitation. Took it without counting it, without looking at it. Just folded it and slipped it into his pocket with a motion that was so practiced, so casual, so comfortable that I realized this was normal for him now. This was who he had become. A man who charged his mother to drive her to chemotherapy. A man who saw his dying parent as a revenue stream. We walked to his car in silence. He didn't offer to help me with my bag, even though I was carrying an overnight bag with things the hospital had told me to bring. A blanket because the chemotherapy room was cold. A book I probably wouldn't be able to focus on. Snacks in case I got hungry. Ginger candies for the nausea they said would come. He just walked ahead of me to his car and got in and started the engine and waited for me to buckle myself in. I fumbled with the seatbelt, my hands still shaking, my mind already fuzzy with fear and the medications I took every morning to slow the Alzheimer's. He didn't help. He didn't wait. He just sat there looking at his phone until I finally got the buckle to click. The hospital was 15 miles away. 15 miles of roads I used to know so well I could drive them with my eyes closed. Streets I had driven thousands of times back when driving was something I could do, back when my mind was sharp and reliable, and mine. Daniel pulled out of my driveway and turned left, which was correct, which was the way we needed to go. I let out a breath I didn't know I was holding. Maybe this would be okay. Maybe he would get me there safely. Maybe the money didn't matter as much as I thought it did. Maybe I was being too sensitive, too emotional, too lost in my own deteriorating sense of what was normal and what wasn't. We drove for 3 minutes in silence, except for the sound of his music playing through the car speakers. Something loud and aggressive with words I couldn't understand that made my head hurt, but that I didn't ask him to turn down because I didn't want to be difficult, didn't want to be the nagging mother, didn't want to give him any reason to regret helping me even though he was being paid $400 to do it. And then he missed the turn. The hospital required a right turn onto Madison Avenue. Everyone in town knew that. It was the main road, the obvious road, the only road that made sense. I had been going to that hospital for 40 years, since before Daniel was born, back when Robert and I were young and I was pregnant with my first child, and everything felt possible and hopeful and full of promise. Daniel drove right past Madison Avenue. He didn't slow down. He didn't hesitate. He didn't signal like he had forgotten to turn. He just kept going straight as if the hospital didn't exist, as if we weren't supposed to be going there, as if my life didn't depend on making that 9 o'clock appointment that I had been worrying about for a week. "Honey," I said, my voice small and uncertain and already doubting itself. "You missed the turn. Madison Avenue. That was it. We need to turn around." He didn't respond. Maybe he didn't hear me over the music. Maybe I hadn't spoken loudly enough. The Alzheimer's makes me doubt everything now, makes me question whether words actually left my mouth or just echoed around inside my head where no one can hear them. "Honey," I said again, louder this time, more insistent, "you need to turn around. We missed Madison Avenue, the hospital. We are going to be late." That's when he looked at me. That's when he turned his head away from the road and looked directly at me for the first time since he had picked me up, since he had taken my money, since this terrible morning had begun. And I saw something in his face that made my blood run cold and my heart start hammering against my ribs. He was smiling, not a warm smile, not a reassuring smile, not the smile of a son comforting his frightened mother on the way to her first cancer treatment. This was something else, something cold, something calculated, something cruel. And he said, in a voice so casual it felt like a physical slap, "We're not going to the hospital right now, Mom. We're going somewhere else first. I need to make a stop, just a quick errand." My heart started pounding so hard I could feel it in my throat. A stop. What kind of stop? Where were we going? Why hadn't he mentioned this before? Why hadn't he asked me if this was okay? I tried to organize my scattered thoughts. tried to make my brain work properly, tried to cut through the fog of fear and confusion to understand what was happening. "Where are we going?" I asked, and I hated how my voice shook, hated how weak and small I sounded, hated that I was so completely at his mercy, so utterly dependent on someone who was looking at me with that terrible smile. He didn't answer right away. He just turned back to the road and kept driving and kept smiling, and we moved farther and farther from the hospital, farther from my treatment, farther from the thing that might save my life. Finally, he said, "Just a quick errand, Mom. Won't take long. You'll still make your appointment. Probably." That word, that terrible word that meant he did not care whether I made my appointment or not. That meant my life, my cancer, my need for treatment was secondary to whatever errand he had to run. The word hung in the air between us like poison, like a threat, like a promise that everything was about to get much worse. I looked out the window and tried to figure out where we were, but nothing looked familiar. Or maybe everything looked familiar in that terrible way the Alzheimer's creates, where you recognize shapes and colors but cannot place them, cannot name them, cannot trust your own perception of reality. Streets blurred together, houses became indistinct shapes, trees looked like trees, but which trees? What street? What part of town? I had no idea. The world outside the car window felt like it was dissolving, felt like reality itself was coming apart at the seams. "Daniel," I said, and I was trying not to cry, trying to keep my voice steady. "Please, I need to get to the hospital. The appointment is at 9. If I miss it, they might not be able to reschedule for weeks. The doctor said timing was critical. Please, don't do this." He cranked up the music, louder. So loud it hurt my ears and made my head throb and drowned out my voice completely. So loud I couldn't think, couldn't speak, couldn't do anything but sit there and feel my chest tightening with panic. And he kept driving, away from the hospital, away from help, away from any possibility that I would make that appointment on time. We pulled into a parking lot outside a building I had never seen before. At least I didn't think I had seen it before. With Alzheimer's, you can never be completely sure. Maybe I had been here a dozen times and forgotten. Maybe this was somewhere significant and I just couldn't access the memory. Maybe my brain was lying to me again. Daniel put the car in park and turned off the engine, and the sudden silence after all that noise was almost worse, was almost more threatening. "Stay here," he said. "I'll just be a few minutes. Lock the doors. Don't get out." And then he was gone, disappearing through the glass doors of the building, leaving me alone in a locked car in a parking lot I didn't recognize, with a chemotherapy appointment I was now going to miss, and a mind that couldn't be trusted to make sense of any of it. I watched him disappear into the building. I watched the glass doors close behind him. I looked at the clock on the dashboard. 8:42 in the morning. I had 18 minutes to get to the hospital, 15 miles away, through morning traffic. And I was sitting in a locked car with no phone because I had forgotten it on the kitchen counter the way I forgot so many things now. No way to call for help. No way to get myself to that appointment. No way to do anything but sit here and wait and hope that my son would come back, and hope that he would take me where I needed to go, and hope that there was still time. I sat there and I thought about Robert, my husband, my partner, the man who had loved me through 43 years of marriage, through raising 2 children, through my parents' deaths and his parents' deaths, through financial struggles and health scares, and all the normal difficulties of building a life together. The man who had promised in sickness and in health, and who had kept that promise right up until his own body betrayed him and cancer took him from me. Robert would never have done this to me. Robert would have carried me to that hospital on his back if he had to. Robert would have given anything, everything to be here now, to protect me, to save me from this moment. But Robert was gone, and I was alone with a son who saw me as nothing but a transaction. You need to subscribe to this channel. I know that sounds abrupt. I know you are in the middle of my story and you want to know what happens next, and I promise I will tell you every terrible detail. But first, I need you to understand something important. This channel exists because there are thousands of us out here who feel invisible, who feel abandoned, who feel like burdens to the people who are supposed to love us most. When you subscribe, you are not just clicking a button. You are joining a community of people who understand what it means to wake up confused, to forget the names of people you love, to feel your mind slipping away piece by piece while everyone around you loses patience. Every video we share here is a reminder that you are not alone in this fight. Every story we tell is proof that your experience matters, that your pain is valid, that you deserve to be treated with dignity and respect. Every subscription is another person saying, "I see you. I understand you. I am here with you in this darkness." So please take 2 seconds right now and click that subscribe button. Turn on the notification bell so you never miss a story. Because these stories are for you. They are about you. They are written from the depths of experiences like yours, experiences of being forgotten and dismissed and devalued by the very people who should cherish us most. Subscribe now. Become part of this family. Let us be the place where you don't have to pay for love, where you don't have to earn your worth, where you are valued simply because you exist. Daniel came back to the car 17 minutes later. 17 minutes that felt like 17 hours, 17 days, 17 lifetimes of sitting in that locked car, watching the clock tick past my appointment time, watching my chance at survival slip away minute by minute. 17 minutes during which I convinced myself he had abandoned me completely, that he was never coming back, that I would die in this parking lot alone and confused and terrified, and no one would know where to find me. But he did come back. He opened the driver's side door with that same casual expression on his face, that same lack of concern, that same complete absence of guilt or remorse. He slid into the driver's seat like everything was normal, like he hadn't just sabotaged his mother's cancer treatment. "Sorry about that," he said in that same light tone. "Took longer than I thought. Business stuff. You know how it is." And then he looked at the clock on the dashboard, and I watched something flicker across his face. Something that might have been guilt. Something that might have been concern. Something that might have been absolutely nothing at all, because I could no longer read the expressions of my own child, could no longer tell what he was thinking or feeling, or whether he thought or felt anything about me at all anymore. "It's 9:05, he said. "We're definitely going to be late. They probably won't see you if you're late. These medical places are really strict about appointment times. We should probably just skip it today and reschedule for next week. No big deal. Right?" No. The word erupted out of me with a force I didn't know I still possessed. No, absolutely not. I am not rescheduling. You are taking me to that hospital right now. This is my life, Daniel. This is cancer. This is chemotherapy that the doctor said was time-sensitive and critical, and could not be delayed. You are taking me there right now. Daniel sighed. He actually sighed, like I was being unreasonable, like I was the problem in this situation. "Mom," he said, and his voice had that edge to it now, that thinly veiled frustration that I had heard more and more over the past months. "It's already past 9. By the time we get there, it'll be 9:20 at least. They're not going to see you. The slots are probably already filled. Just calm down and we'll call them later today and reschedule." It's not a big deal, but it was a big deal. It was everything. And something inside me that had been bending and bending and bending for months finally snapped. "Take me to the hospital," I said again, and my voice was shaking, but it was also loud, louder than I had spoken to him in years. "Take me right now, or I am getting out of this car and finding my own way there." He didn't move. He just sat there with his hands on the steering wheel staring straight ahead, and I realized with a clarity that cut through all the fog and confusion and fear that he was actually considering it. He was actually debating whether to just take me home, whether to collect his $400 and drive me back to my empty house, and leave me there to figure out on my own how to reschedule, how to explain, how to salvage this appointment that he had deliberately sabotaged. The chemotherapy was supposed to start today. The doctor had been very specific about timing. Delays could impact effectiveness. Delays could mean the difference between life and death. And my son, the child I had grown inside my own body, the baby I had nursed at my breast, the boy I had loved with every fiber of my being for 37 years, was going to let me die because he couldn't be bothered to get me to an appointment on time after making a mysterious detour for business stuff. I opened the car door. My hands were shaking so badly I could barely work the handle, but I managed it, and I got out, and I started walking. I had no idea where I was. I had no idea which direction the hospital was in. I had no phone, no money, except for the $400 I had already given him. No plan except the bone-deep certainty that I could not get back in that car, could not trust him, could not let him have any more power over my life or my death. I heard him calling after me, "Mom, Mom, get back here. You can't just walk away. Where do you think you're going? You'll get lost. Mom!" But I kept walking, one foot in front of the other. My legs felt weak. My breath was coming in gasps. The world was tilting sideways, but I kept walking because what else could I do? What else was left to me except this futile gesture of autonomy, this probably doomed attempt to take control of my own survival? He caught up to me in the parking lot, grabbed my arm, not hard enough to bruise but firm enough to stop me, firm enough to assert physical control. His face was different now. The casual indifference was gone, and in its place was something that looked almost like concern, almost like the son I used to know, almost like love. "Mom, stop," he said. "Please, you're right. I'm sorry. That was wrong of me. I shouldn't have made that stop. I should have taken you straight to the hospital. I'll take you there right now. I promise. Please get back in the car." I looked at him and tried to find truth in his eyes, but I couldn't. I couldn't tell if he meant it or if this was just another manipulation, just another way to control me, just another transaction in the relationship that used to be built on something real and pure and unconditional. But what choice did I have? I was standing in a parking lot I didn't recognize in a town I could barely navigate anymore, with a disease that made me doubt my own perceptions. So I let him lead me back to the car. I let him help me into the passenger seat with unexpected gentleness. I let him buckle my seatbelt with hands that were surprisingly careful. And then he drove. And this time, he took the right turns. This time he drove straight to the hospital. This time he got me there. We arrived at 9:17. The receptionist looked concerned when I explained I had been delayed. She checked her computer. She made a phone call. And then she said, "It's okay. They can still take you. Go ahead and have a seat, and they'll call you back in just a few minutes." The relief was so intense, I started crying right there in the waiting room, and I couldn't stop. Daniel sat next to me. He held my hand. He didn't say anything, but he sat there and held my hand. And for just that moment, I thought maybe I had been wrong about everything. Maybe he did care. Maybe the money thing was complicated in ways I didn't understand, because my mind didn't work right anymore. Maybe my deteriorating brain had twisted something innocent into something sinister. Maybe my son was still there, still loved me, still wanted to help. They called my name, Margaret Richardson. I stood up. Daniel stood with me. "I'll wait right here," he said. "I'll be here the whole time. I'm not going anywhere." And I believed him because I needed to believe him, because the alternative was too painful. The chemotherapy took 4 hours. 4 hours of sitting in a reclining chair while poison dripped into my veins with the hope that it would kill the cancer cells faster than it killed the healthy ones. 4 hours of nausea that came in waves. 4 hours of shaking and cold, and the sharp chemical smell that I would forever associate with survival and suffering in equal measure. 4 hours during which I thought about Daniel sitting in that waiting room, thought about the fact that he had stayed, thought about his hand holding mine, thought about the possibility that maybe there was still hope for us. Maybe our relationship could survive my illnesses. Maybe love could win out over whatever darkness had been growing between us. When they finally unhooked me from the IV and helped me to my feet, when they gave me discharge instructions and prescriptions and told me I did great and I should rest and they would see me next week for round 2, I walked back out to that waiting room with something that felt dangerously close to hope. Daniel wasn't there. The waiting room was full of people, but none of them were my son. I looked around, certain I must be missing him, certain the chemotherapy drugs were making me confused. But no, he was gone. I approached the receptionist with legs that felt like water. "Excuse me?" I said. "Did you see where my son went? The young man who came in with me?" She checked something on her computer. She looked sympathetic. "Oh yes," she said. "He left about an hour ago. He said to tell you he had somewhere he needed to be, but he was sure you could get a cab home. He left this for you." She handed me a piece of paper. On it, Daniel had scrawled, "Sorry, Mom. Had an important meeting. Call a cab. The number is 555-1234. See you next week." I stood there in that fluorescent-lit waiting room with poison still coursing through my veins and exhaustion in every cell of my body, and the last fragments of my hope crumbling to dust. I understood with perfect clarity that my son had never intended to wait for me. He had walked me inside because I was making a scene in the parking lot. He had held my hand because people were watching. He had said all the right things because that's what you do when you need to appear to be a good son. And then the moment no one was looking, the moment I was safely tucked away behind closed doors where I couldn't embarrass him or make demands or expect him to actually care, he had left. I took a cab home. It cost $63. I gave the driver a $20 tip because he was patient with me when I couldn't remember my address right away, when I had to pull out my notebook and search for it written there in Sarah's handwriting, when I started crying in the back seat and couldn't stop. He helped me to my front door. He asked if I would be okay, if there was anyone I could call. I lied and said yes. Inside my empty house, I sat at the kitchen table and stared at the space where the $400 had been that morning. $400 to be driven partway to a hospital and then abandoned. $400 to learn once and for all that my son valued money more than my life. $400 to understand that I was truly alone in this fight against two diseases that were both trying to kill me in different ways at different speeds. But here is what I need you to understand. Here is the part of the story that matters more than all the rest. I kept going to chemotherapy. I found a medical transport service that picked me up and brought me home and cost less than a cab and never once abandoned me in a waiting room. I went every week for 6 months. 6 months of poison and nausea and exhaustion. 6 months of losing my hair in clumps that clogged the shower drain. 6 months of losing weight until my clothes hung on me like I was a child playing dress up. 6 months of losing more memories, more names, more pieces of myself to the Alzheimer's, even as I fought to keep my body alive. But I kept fighting. I kept going. Because whatever else this disease took from me, it had not yet taken my will to survive. The cancer went into remission. The doctors used that word. Remission. Not cured, not beaten, but sleeping, dormant, under control. They said I was lucky. They said the treatment had worked better than they expected given my age and the stage of the cancer. They said I should be proud of myself for fighting so hard, for never missing an appointment, for enduring everything with such grace. They didn't know about Daniel. They didn't know about paying $400 to be driven halfway to my first treatment. They didn't know about being left in a waiting room. They didn't know that my fight had been so much harder than just the cancer, than just the chemotherapy, than just the physical battle. They didn't know that I had also been fighting the heartbreak of being abandoned by my own child. Daniel called me 2 weeks after he abandoned me at the hospital. I saw his name on my phone screen, and for a second I thought about not answering. But I did answer, because he was still my son, because I still loved him, even though I didn't understand him anymore, because some part of me was still hoping that he would apologize, that he would explain, that he would say he was sorry and try to make things right. He didn't apologize. He asked if I needed a ride to my next appointment. Same rate, he said, $200 each way, cash only, like nothing had happened, like abandoning me was perfectly fine, like our last interaction had been normal and acceptable. I said no. I said I had made other arrangements. There was a long silence on the line. Then he said, in a tone I couldn't quite read, "Okay, Mom, whatever you want, but you know where to find me if you change your mind, if you need help." And then he hung up. That was 8 months ago. 8 months since I last spoke to my son. 8 months since I last heard his voice. 8 months of silence broken only by the occasional text message, usually on holidays. Happy Thanksgiving. Merry Christmas. Happy New Year. Brief messages that required no response, that demanded no emotional labor, that let him maintain the appearance of being a dutiful son without actually having to do anything. I stopped responding after the third one. What was the point? My daughter Sarah came to visit last month. I hadn't told her the details about Daniel and the chemotherapy. I had only told her that Daniel and I weren't really talking anymore, that we'd had some difficulties, that it was complicated. I didn't want to burden her with the full truth, didn't want to make her choose between her mother and her brother, didn't want to be the kind of parent who turned children against each other. But Sarah is perceptive. Sarah noticed things, and she finally asked me directly what had happened. So I told her. I told her everything, about the money, about the detour, about being abandoned in the waiting room, about the 8 months of silence. I watched her face change as I spoke, watched shock turn to disbelief, turn to fury. When I finished, she sat there in stunned silence for a long moment. Then she said, in a voice vibrating with anger, "I am going to kill him. I am going to absolutely kill him. How could he do that to you? How could he be so cruel, so selfish, so utterly devoid of basic human decency?" I told her not to be angry. I told her Daniel must be struggling with something, must have his own pain that made him act this way, must be dealing with things I didn't understand. But even as I said it, I didn't quite believe it, because whatever Daniel was dealing with, it didn't excuse what he had done. It didn't make it okay to charge your dying mother for help. It didn't make it okay to sabotage her medical treatment. It didn't make it okay to abandon her when she needed you most. 3 weeks after that conversation, Sarah moved me in with her family. She and Michael cleared out their home office and turned it into a bedroom for me. They didn't ask if I wanted to move. They just presented it as fact. "Mom," Sarah said, "you are coming to live with us. We have plenty of room. The kids are excited. Michael is on board. This is happening. Pack what you want to bring, and we will move you next week. I tried to protest. Tried to say I didn't want to be a burden, didn't want to disrupt their lives, could still manage on my own. But Sarah just looked at me and said, "Mom, you are not a burden. You are my mother. You gave me life. You raised me. You loved me unconditionally for 34 years. Letting me love you back is not a burden. It is a privilege. It is a gift. Please let me do this." So I let her, because I was tired of being alone, because I was tired of fighting by myself, because I wanted to spend whatever time I had left, whether that was months or years or just weeks, surrounded by people who actually loved me rather than sitting in an empty house, counting my diminishing memories like pennies. Living with Sarah has been good, better than good. I have my own room with my own bathroom and a window that looks out onto their backyard where I can watch the birds and the changing seasons. Her children, my grandchildren Emma and Jack, visit me every day. They tell me stories about school. They show me their drawings and their homework. They don't seem to mind when I ask the same questions over and over, when I forget what they told me 5 minutes ago, when I call them by the wrong names sometimes. They just gently correct me and move on like it's no big deal. They have started writing things down for me too. Notes they leave on my nightstand. "Hi, Grandma. It's Emma. Today is Wednesday. We love you." Such small kindnesses that mean everything. Sarah takes me to my doctor appointments. Everyone. She holds my hand during the follow-up scans to make sure the cancer stays in remission. She sits with me at the neurologist when they evaluate my cognitive decline and adjust my medications. She organizes my pills. She helps me bathe when I forget how. She brushes my hair. She reads to me when the words on the page won't stay still long enough for me to make sense of them. She never once asks for money. She never makes me feel like I owe her. She just loves me the way I loved her once upon a time when she was small and helpless and completely dependent on me for everything. As for Daniel, I have not seen him or spoken to him in nearly a year now. Sarah tried reaching out to him after I moved in with her. She wanted to tell him where I was, that I was doing okay considering everything, that maybe he would like to visit. She sent him emails and texts and even tried calling a few times. He never responded, not once. It was like I had died and he just hadn't been informed. Or maybe like I had died and he simply didn't care. Sometimes I forget I have a son at all. The Alzheimer's is getting worse, progressing despite the medications, taking more and more of my memories, and leaving blank spaces where people and moments and entire years used to be. Sometimes I look at old photographs and see a young boy I don't recognize, and Sarah has to tell me, "That's Daniel, Mom, your son, my brother." And then it all comes flooding back. The betrayal, the money, the abandonment, the silence, and the pain is fresh all over again, sharp and cutting like it just happened yesterday. Other times I forget the pain but remember the boy. I remember holding him as a baby, his tiny fingers wrapped around mine. I remember his first steps, his first words, the way he used to run to me when he was scared or hurt or happy. I remember reading him bedtime stories and singing him lullabies and promising him that I would always be there to keep him safe. And then Sarah gently reminds me that he's not that boy anymore, hasn't been for a long time, and I have to grieve all over again for the child I knew and the man he became. But here is the twist. Here is the part that changes everything I have told you so far. Last week I was going through some old boxes in Sarah's attic, boxes I had brought from my house when I moved, things I had saved over the years without really knowing why. Old report cards, crayon drawings, baby clothes I couldn't bring myself to throw away. And at the bottom of one box, I found something I had completely forgotten existed. A letter, an essay really, written in Daniel's handwriting from when he was 12 years old. It was a school assignment. The teacher had asked each student to write about their hero, about the person they admired most in the world. Daniel had written about me. 4 pages in his careful 12-year-old handwriting, every letter precisely formed, every word chosen with such care. I sat in that dusty attic and I read it, and I cried harder than I have cried since Robert died. He wrote about how I worked 2 jobs to support him and Sarah after their father died when they were young. He wrote about how I never complained, even though he could see how exhausted I was all the time. He wrote about how I always made sure they had what they needed, even if it meant I went without. He wrote about how I helped with homework every night, even after working 10-hour shifts. He wrote about how I volunteered at their school and coached Sarah's soccer team and never missed a single one of his baseball games. He wrote about how I was the strongest person he knew. And at the end of the letter, in that careful 12-year-old handwriting that broke my heart into a million pieces, he wrote, When I grow up, I want to be just like my mom. I want to take care of people the way she takes care of us. I want to be strong like her. I want to be kind like her. I want to make people feel safe and loved the way she makes me feel safe and loved every single day. I sat in that attic holding that letter, and I cried for the boy who wrote those words. I cried for the man he became. I cried for the moment when something inside him broke and turned all that love into resentment, all that admiration into cruelty, all that gratitude into a $400 transaction. Because that is the real tragedy here. Not that I have Alzheimer's, not that I had cancer, not even that I was abandoned by my own son in my greatest time of need. The real tragedy is that the child who once thought I was a hero grew into an adult who saw me as nothing more than a burden, an inconvenience, a source of income. Somewhere along the way, he learned to put a price on love. Somewhere along the way, he forgot that the woman paying him $400 to take her to chemotherapy was the same woman who had given him everything she had for the first 18 years of his life and asked for nothing in return except that he grow up to be a good man. Somewhere along the way, the boy who wanted to be just like his mom became the man who would rather charge her for help than give it freely. I don't know when it happened. I don't know what changed him. Maybe it was losing his father so young. Maybe it was watching me struggle financially for so many years. Maybe it was something I did or didn't do, some failure of my parenting that I can't even remember now because my mind is full of holes and missing pieces. Or maybe it wasn't about me at all. Maybe he just became someone I didn't raise, someone I don't recognize, someone who values money more than family and convenience more than compassion. I will never know. And because of this disease, I will eventually forget the question entirely. There will come a day when I don't remember Daniel at all, when his face is just another stranger's face in a photograph someone shows me. There will come a day when I don't remember the betrayal, the hurt, the crushing disappointment of being abandoned by the child I loved most in the world. The Alzheimer's will take all of it, the good memories and the bad. The 12-year-old boy writing about his hero and the 37-year-old man driving past the hospital with that terrible smile. But right now, in this moment, I remember. I remember all of it, and I have to find a way to hold both truths at once. That my son once loved me enough to write a 4-page essay about how I was his hero, and that this same son grew up to charge me money to drive me to cancer treatment, and then abandoned me in a hospital waiting room. Both of those things are real. Both of those people exist in the timeline of Daniel's life and my life together, and I don't know how to reconcile them. I don't know how to make sense of it. Maybe there is no making sense of it. Maybe some things are just broken beyond repair. If you are still watching this, if you have made it this far into my story, then you understand what it means to love someone who has hurt you. You understand what it means to hold on to memories that cut like glass. You understand what it means to lose parts of yourself while the people around you lose patience with your losing. And I want you to know that you are not alone. I want you to know that your pain is real and your experience matters, and you deserve to be loved without conditions, without price tags, without the constant fear of being too much, asking too much, needing too much. Subscribe to this channel if you haven't already. Join this community of people who understand what it means to fight battles that are invisible to everyone else. Let us be the family that doesn't forget you, doesn't abandon you, doesn't make you pay for basic human kindness. Click that subscribe button right now. Turn on notifications. Be here with us, because we need you as much as you need us. We are all walking each other home through this darkness. We are all trying to remember what matters even as so much is forgotten. We are all trying to hold on to love even when the people who are supposed to love us most turn away. My name is written on a piece of paper in my pocket. Margaret Ann Richardson. My daughter's phone number is there too. My address, my diagnoses, all the things I might forget written down in Sarah's handwriting so I can find my way back when I get lost. But some things I don't need to write down because they are burned into me with such intensity that I think they might survive even this disease. I remember that I am loved. I remember that Sarah calls me every night to say goodnight even though I sleep in the room next door. I remember that Emma and Jack made me a card that says "We love you, Grandma," and taped it to my mirror so it's the first thing I see every morning. I remember that being loved is not the same thing as being a burden, and that the people who truly love you never make you feel like you are too much, too needy, too broken. And I remember Daniel, not just the man who charged me $400 and drove past the hospital with that terrible smile. Not just the man who abandoned me in a waiting room when I needed him most. not just the man who has not spoken to me in nearly a year. I also remember the boy, the 12-year-old with the careful handwriting and the open heart, the child who thought his mother was a hero, the boy who wanted to be just like me when he grew up. That boy is gone now, lost to time, and whatever darkness turned him into someone I don't recognize, but he was real once. He existed. I have the letter to prove it, and maybe that has to be enough. Maybe that is all I get to keep. I see you, and you are not a burden. That is what I want you to remember when this video ends, and you go back to your life with all its complications and pain and impossible choices. You are not a burden. Your need for help does not diminish your worth. Your confusion does not make you less deserving of love. Your forgotten names and repeated questions and lost moments do not erase the fact that you are a human being who matters, who has value, who deserves kindness and patience and care. Write it down if you need to. Put it on a piece of paper in your pocket next to your name and your address and all the other things you might forget. I see you, and you are not a burden. Let it be the thing you remember when everything else slips away. Thank you for listening to my story. Thank you for being here. Thank you for seeing me and letting me see you. Leave a comment if this resonated with you. Tell me your story. Share this video if you know someone who needs to hear it. Someone who is fighting their own battles with diseases that steal memories or bodies or both. Someone who knows what it feels like to be abandoned by people who should have loved them better. Subscribe if you want more stories like this, more truth, more honest recognition of the hard and complicated realities we all face when illness transforms our lives and the people in them. And remember, whether your mind is sharp or failing, whether you are surrounded by love or drowning in loneliness, whether you remember everything or nothing at all, you matter. Your story matters. Your pain matters. Your survival matters. You are not a burden. You never were. And anyone who makes you feel otherwise, anyone who puts a price tag on their love, anyone who abandons you when you need them most, they are the ones who should be ashamed. Not you. Never you. This is my story. This is my truth. And it is the last thing I will hold on to when the Alzheimer's takes everything else. The knowledge that I survived, that I fought, that I was loved by the people who mattered, and that somewhere in a dusty attic there is a letter written by a 12-year-old boy who once believed his mother was a hero. That boy was right, even if the man he became forgot.